Welcome back to another edition of the Magic Latest Podcast where we discuss everything Orlando Magic basketball. I'm your host, Jalon Dixon, and today we've got a handful of things to get into. But before we kick off today's episode, remember to like, comment, and subscribe for daily Orlando Magic content. We are on the road to 1,000 subscribers and trying to become one of the biggest Orlando Magic platforms here on the YouTube site. But with that being all said, let's go ahead and get into today's episode, starting off with some small forward rankings I found from Hoops Hype. Over the next couple of weeks, I will be going through some positional rankings as well as some power rankings that involve the Orlando Magic leading up to the start of the regular season. And on this one with Hoops Hype, they ranked Fron Vagner as the third best small forward in the NBA going into the 2025-2026 season, above players like Jimmy Butler, Kawhi Leonard, Scottie Barnes, and many others. The only two players he was ranked behind, LeBron James and Kevin Durant. Check out the article for yourself if you want the full list. Thought it was just really interesting that Franz Wagner is already getting enough love to be considered as the third best small forward in the league. And according to the rankings that I saw, he also is kind of being up there as the best two-way wing of anybody in the league, considering that other names like Kawhi Leonard, Mikal Bridges, and Scottie Barnes were all ranked behind him, and players like LeBron James and Kevin Durant are more so known for their offensive acumen these days as opposed to their two-way ability. Franz Wagner, on the other hand, is definitely a two-way small forward to the fullest, and a guy that I think is going to have a real chance to be an all-star this upcoming year. The biggest knock from Hoops Hype, of course, was three-point shooting. This was a guy who shot 35% on 5 attempts per game last year. I think if he can jump more close to league average with that same volume of 36 to 37%, I think he's going to be in the All-Star game this year. And I think that Hoops Hype kind of agrees that he's in that echelon of a guy that should be discussed not only as an All-Star, but as a guy that could potentially land in the All-NBA conversation next season. Next up, Franz Wagner, still the topic of conversation, but on FIBA.com, they ranked their top 25 players to keep an eye out on during FIBA Eurobasket, and Franz Wagner was ranked 7th. Of course, the biggest thing that they were paying attention to was the growth of Franz Wagner on a year-to-year basis. We've discussed this on the podcast before, that it seems like every single time Franz goes over to FIBA, the boy ends up picking up a different addition to his bag, and it makes him just look more like a guy that's primed for a breakout season. In this upcoming offseason, he has a chance to be able to add a real offensive game to himself with the ability to continue to change speeds, learn how to play more within himself as an on-ball threat, and a dude that I think in Eurobasket in particularly is going to be a really good opportunity for him, I think, to continue to expand his game as an on-ball threat. And I think the main thing I want to see from Franz, aside from his three-point shooting, right, continuing to add on that, is I want to continue to see Franz Wagner grow as a driver. I think that's going to be so important for this upcoming season because you look at the three-point shooting now, Jace Richardson, Desmond Bane, Jalen Suggs. Hopefully Anthony Black improves as a three-point shooter. Tyus Jones. Like, similar to some things I've said about Paolo Banchero in the past, Franz Wagner benefits in a similar way of with that kind of three-point shooting acumen around him. This will be the first time that they play on a space floor. This will be the first time that if you're running lineups that have Jalen Suggs and Desmond Bane on the floor at the same time, right? And you have Franz Wagner, Paolo Banchero, and Wendell Carter Jr. This is the first time where you have legitimate three-point shooters on the perimeter that open up the floor for guys like Franz Wagner and Paolo Banchero as drivers. So it'll be really interesting to see with real spacing how Franz Wagner is able to get to the basket. I don't know if he's going to have that same level of spacing. Maybe he has better spacing playing for Team Germany. But I want to see Franz Wagner impose his will as a guy trying to get to the basket. I think that he's a high-level finisher at 6'10", and I think that if he can have a little bit more space, people will be forced to have to guard him straight up in a way where that's going to be a good one-on-one mismatch in favor of Wagner, where he can either get to the cup at will or they're going to have to foul him, similar to what the Orlando Magic have been able to get out of Paolo Banchero, who's averaged basically about 7 to 8 free throw attempts per game since his rookie season. So these are two guys that if they're in the 6, 7, and 8 free throw attempts per game range combined, even get yourself up to 8, 9, and 10 range combined, or a piece, that's anywhere between 14 and 20 free throw attempts per game from your all-star front court. That's a huge momentum swing. We saw the favor of a guy like Jimmy Butler, what he added to the Golden State Warriors as a guy who instantly became their leading free throw attempt guy once he was traded from Miami, or once he was acquired from Miami. That team struggled with getting to the free throw line. Jimmy Butler gets to that team. All of a sudden, they're one of the better teams at getting to the charity strike. With the Orlando Magic, this is a team that already was very beneficial, or very much benefited from Paulo Banchero getting to the free throw line a ton. We saw that the Oklahoma City Thunder, a team that outside of Shai Gilgeous-Alexander doesn't really get to the free throw line that much, yet Shai gets to the free throw line so much individually that they were ranked within the top 10 in free throw attempts per game, right, as a team. So these two guys, if they can combine for anywhere to 14 to 20 free throw attempts per game, just amongst those two getting the all-star whistle, it opens up so much more for the rest of the Orlando Magic offense. So I'm looking forward to Fron Vagner's overall FIBA performances, and I'm more particularly looking at some of the things that I think are going to be really important translation-wise to his team with the Orlando Magic. I think, again, becoming a more elite driver and, of course, improving that three-point shot. Those two things are going to be super critical for Fron Vagner to add to this team. Next up, let's talk about Goga Bitadze, a guy I haven't talked about in quite some time. Obviously, we've touched on, the X Factor aspect of Anthony Black, and a guy who's going to get a lot of talk up until the trade deadline is going to be Goga. I thought it was really interesting that there was a podcast, the Game Theory podcast with Sam Vecini. I've referenced them before. Bryce Simon, who was a regular co-host on that show, had an interesting statement about Goga Bitadze on the Orlando Magic, saying, "I'll be shocked if we get through another deadline unless I would be shocked if we get through another deadline unless teams just stay extremely healthy. Unless they stay extremely healthy, I guess. Excuse me. I would be shocked. I'm sure teams are calling. I think eventually a team is going to have to make an offer that Orlando is going to have to take. I think he's one of the best. He's one of the better backup bigs in this league. I feel like that immediately puts him in the conversation to be a starting big. All the stuttering is because I believe the fear of Goga Bitadze being moved sooner than we would like is a reality. I think that if you're an Orlando Magic fan, the reality is that Goga Bitadze's value is probably much higher this season than waiting until he becomes a 1-year expiring contract next year, right? I think that people, especially if they think that Goga Bitadze is a starting caliber center, are going to want to see him in their program much sooner than just half a season for a potential playoff run, when he's a guy that you then have to pay probably the upward of $20 million a year. I mean, that's where Kristaps is. That's in the space of where Nicholas Claxton is. Nikola Vucevic is around that area. So you're talking about a guy that you legitimately have to consider giving $20 million or more the following season, and you'd only have half a year's worth of resume from him in your program to get a good understanding of that's whether or not that fits for you and whether or not that's fiscally responsible for your franchise, right? So the reality is that Goga Bitadze will probably not be on this team by the end of 2026. That's the reality. I don't believe he will be on this team by the end of the NBA trade deadline. Similar to what Bryce Simon said, this feels like a team that's going to have to make a move with Goga Bitadze to maximize his overall skill set, maximize his overall value on the open market, given that the center position is one that, although it's quote-unquote easily replaceable, finding solid center depth has become a much more difficult feat nowadays because a lot of the rim-running, shot-blocking centers are all under contract at the moment, especially the elite ones, the Rudy Goberts and players of that ilk. Rudy Gobert, Walker Kessler, Donovan Clingan's obviously going into his second year. Guys that fit that mold are already under contract with their team, so you have to trade for them. And those guys, either in Rudy Gobert's case or like Walker Kessler's contract is relatively feasible, but because it's so little, similar to Donovan Clingan, it's a little bit harder to trade for him. Rudy Gobert probably has one of the worst contracts in the NBA. Just in comparison to his production, he's a DPOY level candidate, but he's a guy that only really is sufficient on one side of the floor, being defensively. Offense obviously leaves a lot to desire. So Goga Batadze, he's going to go for a pretty penny. I think that he is deserving of being able to be acquired for a first round pick. Multiple first round picks might be dragging it. But I think Goga Batadze could be traded for a first round pick, a future first round pick. And I think that would be very valuable to an Orlando Magic team that obviously gave away so many so recently in the Desmond Bane trade. But if you're a Goga Batadze fanboy, you should probably brace yourself because it seems like momentum is picking up, that people believe the likelihood of him being on the roster around the NBA trade deadline very low. Very, very low. Apologies for a lot of the pausing. Not feeling too well today. But let's finish off with a Sports Illustrated fake trade. They're all over the place, man. They're all over the place. And here we are with another fake trade involving acquiring Darius Garland and doing it without giving up Desmond Bane. The particular trade in mind involves trading Jonathan Isaac, Wendell Carter, Anthony Black, Jet Howard, I believe, was also in the trade, and the 2029 first round pick that we have. I don't like the idea of giving up on Anthony Black. I don't like the idea of giving up on insane forward/center depth for a point guard who has real injury concerns, despite the upside that he provides offensively. I fear that in this situation, you're bumping Jalen Suggs to the bench, and I am not big on that just yet either. Given the fact that I'd like to see him play next to a player like Desmond Bane. I feel like there's a real Drew Holiday next to Derek White type of situation with Jalen playing next to somebody like Desmond Bane. I feel like you take away a lot of rim protection all in one trade without actually replacing it in any real way by giving up on Jonathan Isaac and Wendell Carter. Yes, I think this is also where the Goga Batadze fanboy, for example, would say, okay, well now Goga Batadze, who is a starting level center, can start for the Orlando Magic, and we just have to figure out a way to pay him. But that's the key thing. Figuring out the way to pay him is going to be pretty intriguing, given the fact that this trade still only opens up but so much real cap flexibility and gives away a future first in the process. I think, getting rid of a guy like Jet Howard, not too upset about it. I think the idea of being able to move off of Wendell Carter Jr., not too upset about it. But I think we need to respect what Jonathan Isaac provides to this team right now. And it's not something that you just give away. And in this sense, you are, because you're not replacing it with any other version of real rim protection. I think we're also giving up on Anthony Black a little soon. I think of all the players I've ever mentioned when I talk about the Orlando Magic trade block, Anthony Black tends to be the fifth player on that listing, and it just tends to be, his value is significantly high, but that's why he's so low on the totem pole for me as a player that the Orlando Magic would genuinely consider trading. My list has always been the same. I believe Jet Howard is at the top. I think Goga Batadze, given his contract situation, is next. I think from a value standpoint, I think then you go to a guy like Jonathan Isaac. And then fourth would be Wendell Carter Jr. And that's simply because he's our starting center and is able to play significant minutes. Jonathan Isaac, I think, is a better overall defender than Wendell Carter Jr., but he's only able to play in limited minutes to be highly successful. So I have to take that into consideration. So it's always been in order of who I think will be traded or who should be traded from the Orlando Magic. It's always been Jet Howard, Goga Batadze, Jonathan Isaac, Wendell Carter Jr., then Anthony Black. In this trade, you're giving up 3 of the top 5 assets on the Orlando Magic, and you're doing it for another guard and taking away significant depth at your forward/center position without replacing it in any real way. Not really a fan of that process. You guys let me know in the comment section down below how you guys feel about this kind of transaction. I'm not crazy about it. I think Darius Garland is a superb player at the point guard position, as a guy who I think has a little bit of everything: facilitator, able to get to the rock, get through passing lanes in a real way. On the defensive side, I think he's a guy who's relatively competitive on that side, despite the fact that he's not like elite or anything. I think also, obviously, as an offensive scorer that can get to the cup, a guy who I think can, really create on the perimeter as a 3-point shooter. He fits a lot of the things the Orlando Magic would need had we not had Desmond Bane. Now that we have Desmond Bane, you're looking at a situation where maybe we're running 3 guard lineups of Jalen Suggs, Desmond Bane, Darius Garland, along with Fron Vagner and Paulo Banchero, and now you're making Paulo Banchero a shot blocker. Nothing wrong with that, but it's a lot different in terms of what his overall responsibility is, and it changes the philosophy around what type of defense the Orlando Magic are so used to building the infrastructure around, because Darius Garland, although is a competitive defender, is still closer to average than he is above average as a defender. So, not as big on this trade as Sports Illustrated is. But you guys let me know in the comment section down below, how do you feel about this trade? And how you guys feel about my rankings of players that I feel like are either likely to be traded, or the order in which they consider trading them from a value perspective. Again, that order was Jet Howard at 1, Goga Bataz at 2, Jonathan Isaac at 3, Wendell Carter Jr. at 4, and then Anthony Black at 5. I think that's the order in which you should be concerned about trading these guys, whether it's their value to your team not being as high, or their value for another team being significantly higher. Again, Anthony Black gets put to the bottom of the list because I think his value is so high to the Orlando Magic that I think you don't just give up on him for anything. And in this case, I wouldn't say it's anything. Darius Garland's an all-star, but again, the depth that's lost in the process is also really tough. But that's another edition of the Magic Latest Podcast. I will be back with you guys tomorrow for another update, but until then, peace.